So let me just give a brief recap. We explained that in the previous shurim that there's a difference between kamus and eichus. That the difference between a higher madrega and a lower madrega is not in beikar of kamus, it's in of eichus. That a higher madrega is a higher madrega because it's a different eichus, different quality, different mahus. It's not just a different more mitzias, it's a different mahus. And he goes on to explain that this is true of both Chokhmah and Bina. Even though Chokhmah is called Ayin and Bina is called Yesh, nevertheless, there's a difference mahuti between them. So he questions this. What do you mean is a difference mahuti between them? Chokhmah is also an inyan in Seichel, and Seichel is l'chayra. Bina comes from a Seichel of Chokhmah. Yesoid Abba is mashpia on Bina, and therefore l'chayra Chokhmah is be'erich to Bina. It's not a different getter altogether. So this is what he was explaining, and he just concluded. I forgot to report from the beginning. Im kein harim mishtaba Chokhmah ela Bina be'etzem musa, and therefore Chokhmah and Bina are not apparently different in their mahus. And the only difference between them, which would seem, is that Chokhmah is more oer and Bina is less oer, which seems to be the opposite of what we are trying to prove. So he's going to explain this in more barichus. Why it is that Chokhmah is actually on a different madrega and it's called Ayin. Masha'in Ken Bina is called Yesh. People should Yesh. Loimer Zeu Bechinus Miuta or Bechinus Chokhmah Gufa. There is an in of Miuta or in Chokhmah. True. But that's in the Sphira itself. In other words, there's madregas in Chokhmah that's Bechinus Miuta or. But the etzem inyan of Chokhmah is a mohus that's different from Bina. As we said in the beginning, from the Goin Tanya Perek Lamed Hey, Hu Levada Hu Ve'en Zulase, Zohi Madregas of Chokhmah. The etzem inyan of Chokhmah is Hu Levada Hu Ve'en Zulase. He alone is, and there's nothing besides him. That's the etzem inyan. That's the etzem inyan of Chokhmah. Harich B'tei Shiyeh is Habus Apina Miya Chokhmah. In order for Bina to emerge from Chokhmah, because we said that Chokhmah, the Seichel of Chokhmah, becomes the Hasoga of Bina. In other words, the Etzem, the Kuda that Bina latches onto is the Seichel of Chokhmah, but that's only Yesoid Abba, it's Yesoid of Chokhmah, and not the Etzem of Chokhmah, as he will explain. The Hari B'chtei is Habas Abina Mea Chokhmah, Tzarech Yuzmiut HaOr B'Chokhmah. There has to be a mute of Chokhmah in order for Chokhmah to be melubash in Bina, to be slabish in Bina. Vainu, Masha Madrega Tachtoine the Chokhmah, Heimchinis Yedia Sichlius. It's an Indian in Seichel. It's not an Indian in Hasoga, but it's an Indian in Seichel, nevertheless. As we know, Chokhmah Bina Das, the Indian Seichel. So it's the Madrega Tachtoine of Chokhmah that becomes the inyan of Yadia Sichlis, which is Shaykh to Bina. Shezeu bechinas miut haor. The Madrega Yoina is Heilaman Miseichel Vasoga. Because the higher Madregas of Chokhmah are not the inyan of Seichel Vasoga, it's only the lower Madregas. Madrega Tachtoina, Hein bechinas Seichel Vasoga, are the bechinas Makor Lasoga de Bina. And that's what becomes the Makor for the Hasoga of Bina. The Seichel of Abba becomes the Hasoga of Bina in its lowest madregas of Chokhmah, but not in the higher madregas. But you can't even
Moshe, a quick question here. It seems like you can take any scale of this, looking at the tree of spheres and say it's all, Ribu and Miut, and then once you start zooming into any particular madrega, then you could say, oh, it's not really Ribu and Miut, these are separate things, and so it seems like an infinite. It's like going into the atomic structure, and then you go subatomic, and it's this pattern seems to be repeating it, because you first we're subdividing the oilum. We're saying each oilum is Ribu Mir, but then we say no, each sphere is Ribu Mir. And now we could say that no, it's Chokhmah is itself is. Has it's not Ribu Mir. It has different madrigas in it. So So it's not. What is he trying to say with this? It seems like it's
Okay,
depends on.
I'll tell you where the bigger picture is going. The bigger picture is going like this: that is an inyan of his boinanus. In the inyan of his boinanus, there's particularly his boinanus. There's two inyonim essentially in the inyan of his boinanus. The one inyan in the inyan of his boinanus is essentially the derech of the Mittler Rebbe. That the derech of the Mittler Rebbe was you think through the whole process, the entire Seder Shtalshelus, and understand how each madrega is bechinas bittul to elokus. And where is the inyan of bittul to elokus? Even if you go on, you drill down into chokhmah itself, or it doesn't matter which sphere, it doesn't matter which sphere. Chokhmah of Yesoid of Olam Habriya has that inyan of bittul in it. Why? Because it has that inyan since chokhmah, the primis of chokhmah, hu lavadi hu ends with lasai. So that is, you can find it in Yesoid in Yesoid of Olam Habriya as well. Chokhmah Yesoid of Briya b'chulu. And so it goes down. The entire Seder Shtalshelus, one has to think through and realize that each madrega milamala lamata is a bechina of bittul. That was the derech of the Mittler Rebbe in his boinanus. Along came the Tzemach Tzedek, and he said it's going to take too long, and it's too hard, and it's too time consuming, and people don't have the moech for it anymore anyway. And he gave a whole nother approach, which is to find the elokus bedavar, shebedavar. In other words, you don't have to go this whole long derech of, but what the Rebbe Rashab is doing here, it seems to me anyway, is going the first derech and explaining how each madrega can be broken down into sub-madregas, and yet you can still find the Nakudas Apitul in each madrega. I think that's where we're going with it in the bigger picture. But in the practical picture, it would seem to me, in the practical picture, the vort of the Tzemach Tzedek is nevertheless applies. The hispoinus before tefillah is to learn an inyan Chassidus, whether it's a few lines or whether it's a few paragraphs or maybe even a whole mimer, but to think that through as an inyan in elokus before davening, and that's sufficient. You don't have to go through the whole Seder Shtalshelus. In fact, there's an interesting Maisa that was just sent out about one of the great Chassidim that I think what's his name, Yitzchaki. I forget what his first name was. Al Kopanim, one of the great Chassidim. He spent 6 hours. He spent 6 hours learning Chassidus in the morning. He got up very early, and he spent 6 hours learning Chassidus in the morning. And he would always mark with a pencil where he got up to in the mimer. And one of the other Chassidim once looked at it, and he said, on average, he did about three lines a day. That's how far he got in the mimer. Because he went like, tiff around into the mimer, like in the Mittler Rebbe Shita, how to find the Nekudas Apitul in every particular madrega. But anyway, that's not so much for our times. I think that's the bottom line. Anyway, he goes on to say that we can't say, as we said before, that this is the that it's an inyan of mute. It's not only that there's a mute between Chochmah and Bina, a mute of or. There's a shinui mahus, and he's going to explain this inyan now. The re'iyah v'hasoga harem mechulokim be'etzem mahusam. Then it will come to the inyan of re'iyah, which is the pnimis of Chochmah, and hasoga, which is the inyan of Bina, they mechulokim be'etzem mahusam. Different kinds of inyonim. And even though we would agree that the lower madregas of Chochmah and bechinas seichel hasoga are also seichel and hasoga, and therefore they can relate to Bina and be malubash in Bina, and that's the makor for Bina. It's a different mahus from the higher madregas in Chochmah. In Chochmah itself, you have a shinu mahus from higher madregas in Chochmah and the lower madregas in Chochmah. Okay, he's going to have to explain how this works. That these higher inyonim transcend hasoga, transcend seichel and hasoga. Ze efshar loymar shebemedrega achas yeshinu hamuhus b'medrega prati sheba. But you can't say that. You can't say that in one madrega you're going to have a shinui mahus, because otherwise it wouldn't be called chokhmah. It would be called two different things. If it's called chokhmah, it's one composite issue, and you can't say that there's a shinui mahus between the two of them. So how are we going to explain it? V'inyan mahus urak masha or mismayet. Sorry, v'inyan miut urak masha or mismayet. The inyan miut is that there's a reduction in the or. Yes, it's true that there's an inyan of mute, but it's still the same or. Let's give an example. The light that shines through the window, right? There's no glass in the window that's bima free or whatever it is. It's just an opening in the house. Is it the same light as the light outside? Yes. It's the same eichus of oil. It's just a different kamus of oil. So what we're going on now, l'chayra, is that different spheroids have a different kamus, but they still have the same eichus. Okay, this is what we're going on with now, and we have to examine this inyan. We could say gufa, that in this madrega itself, in other words, let's say the madrega of chokhmah, or mismaid madregas aprati sheba. Within that sphere itself, in other words, you can get mute within that sphere itself. You can get a mute of the or. In other words, in chokhmah, you have chokhmah sheba chokhmah is riboy or, and malchus or yesoid and malchus sheba chokhmah would be a mute or in chokhmah of ora chokhmah, but it's still ora chokhmah. You can't say it's a different mahus. So how do we have the inyan in the spheroids that they are seichel and lamayla seichel? That doesn't in chokhmah, not all the spheroids. In chokhmah, how do you have seichel and lamayla seichel? He has to explain this inyan. Behind the badzoish, the mashmos the inyan who the chokhmah beclose madregasa gamba madregasa tachtoines shaba yivchin is mala beetzim madregasa legabe bina. In other words, not only is it is it mashma that chokhmah as a whole, not just about the higher madregas, but chokhmah as a whole is qualitatively different from bina. It's not just an inyan of mute and riboy, and it's not just an inyan of mute and riboy and chokhmah. All of chokhmah is lamayla mi bina, even though some of chokhmah is melubish in bina. We have to understand this. We can't say that there's two different madregas of chokhmah. Yeah, this here, this is the inyan of pnimis chokhmah is lamal mi aseichel. The inyan of chitonius chokhmah is or the lower madregas of chokhmah, or the inyan of seichel, and therefore seichel the lower madregas of chokhmah can be melubish and bina. It just doesn't seem to fit. The whole thing doesn't seem to work well. Chokhmah seems to be, according to the way we understood it, a different mahus from bina. So we have to understand how this all works together. And now he's going to explain it. Ayin Beis. Chokhmah bina called Ayin Beis. Chokhmah Ayin and bina is called yesh. Chokhmah nikreis Ayin k'boshkas v'chokhmah ma'ayin tematzeh. V'chokhmah ma'ayin tematzeh. Sometimes that's explained as that chokhmah is matzui. In other words, it's somewhat of a bechina of yesh legabe the ayin that it comes out of the inyan of keser. That's not the way he's explaining it over here. When he says of chokhmah ma'ayin tematzeh, it comes out of a madrega, whatever madrega it emerges from, it's tematzeh. It comes out as the madrega of ayin. Masha enkem bina comes out as the madrega of yesh. So chokhmah comes out as ayin, and bina comes out as yesh. V'bina nikres yesh. כמו שכזו להנחיל או אהבה יש. ואם כן, he was אהבה בינה מהחוכמה הוא בחינת יש מאין. Therefore, the kesher between chokhmah and bina is not a kesher of islapshus per se. It's a kesher of yesh mi'ayin. Bina emerges from chokhmah as an inyan of yesh mi'ayin. And this has to be understood. V'hainu she'ayin de chokhmah, he b'chinas helem legabe ha'yesh de bina. That be'etzem bina is never going to grasp the etzem nekudas ha'inyan of chokhmah. Why? Because chokhmah is ayin and bina is yesh. There's a hefresh bein ayin v'yesh le'ila v'alu. There's a difference between ayin and yesh on the one hand, and ila v'alu cause an effect on the other. Ila v'alu is ribui and miut, the lowest madrega of the ila, becomes the highest madrega of the alul. That's the whole in. We say the ishtalshalus that it's a shalshelis. The lowest madrega of the higher madrega becomes the highest madrega of the lower inyan. That's the shalshelis. That's the chain of being. How it chains down. Cause after effect after cause after effect after cause, etc., etc. There's no real connection between them. There's a habdolah between them, and he's going to explain this by Richu's now. The ilva alul hu sha'alul masig es ilasoi. The alul, the effect, grasps its cause. It grasps its cause because the highest madrega of the cause, in the highest madrega of the cause, is malubash. Sorry, in the lowest madrega of the cause is malubash, and the highest madrega of the effect. Again, the lowest madrega of the ila is malubash in the highest madrega of the alul. The cause is malubash in the effect in its lowest madrega. And that's how the alul emerges. It's created from the ila. By the alul grasping, or grasping whether intellectually or in actuality, grasping its cause. When the ila grasps onto the madrega of the cause of the when the alul grabs onto the madrega of the ila that it can grasp a hold of, then there's a connection between them, and it can emerge from the ila. The alul can emerge from the ila. Whereas v'yesh me'ayin is not like that. V'yesh me'ayin hu adrabah. It's exactly the opposite. Sha'ayin mis'alem min hayesh. It's not only hidden from the yesh, but it's out of the grasp. It's out of the reach of the yesh. You cannot grasp it. And that's why the yesh is a yesh, because he cannot grasp the ayin. If he would grasp the ayin, it would also be bechinas ayin. But he can't grasp, and that's why bechinas yesh. Al shem zeh nikra al shem she'en musag. Nikra ayin al shem she'en musag. And that's why it's called ayin, because it's not grasped at all by the lower madrega. And that's the way it is with Chochmah and Bina. That the ayin of Chochmah is concealed from Bina. And Bina does not really grasp the etzem inyan of Chochmah at all. I don't remember what it says over there, but in any event, it explains this probably more by Richu's. Now, we have a question about this. It's difficult to understand. We already said that the Nakudas HaSkola, the Seichel of Chochmah, comes into the Hasoga of Bina. Yes, it's a different type of Bina's analytical thought, and Chochmah is Hamtzoah, it's innovative thought, it's a completely different thing. It's a flash of insight, whereas Bina is only the reconstruction of that original flash of insight, like that flash of lightning, Baraka Mavrik, and Bina sort of reconstructs that in its mind, how it works exactly. So Bina is sort of the construction of, or the analysis and the construction of what came out as Baraka Mavrik, the Nakudas HaChochmah. But there is l'chayra relationship. So what do you mean to tell us that Chochmah is on a different madrega? It's bechinas ayin and Bina is bechinas yesh. How does that work? Furthermore, v'chol ha'asoga de Bina hu b'nekudas ha'askola. What else is Bina thinking about other than the nekuda that comes from Chochmah, the nekuda ha'askola? Ve'ich nikra ha'chochmah ayin l'gabe Bina. How can you say that Chochmah is ayin l'gabe Bina? So he explained now. We have to say that the Nekudas HaSkola is not actually grasped by Bina. Yes, there is a certain inyan in Haskola that it's grasped by Bina, but not the Nekudas HaSkola. And it's B'chinas Havdola mi Bina. It's separated from Bina as being a different Metzias. Nikra Ayin Lagabi Bina. It's called Ayin Lagabi the Yesh of Bina. And it's as follows. Shebasichli the Chochmah Gamken Meir. In Chochmah itself, you get the inyan of etzem. Again, Perek Lamed Hay in Tanya in Hagoah, Hu lavado hu ve'en zulasa zohi madregas hachokma. That there's the Abish that's unique. There's nothing else. Ein oid milvadoi. That is the Indian of Chokhmah, and that's the etzem of Chokhmah. That's what Chokhmah is all about. The Spashtus of other inyonim we'll talk about soon. V'hainu the menekudas haskola, the Chokhmah, within them the etzem nekudas haskola of Chokhmah, meir bazeh dakus etzem inyan hamuskal mashiir shalavoli de hasoga. Something that cannot come into the thought process at all. It cannot come into the analytical process. It cannot be understood in the categories of mind. There is a certain inyan chokhmah that cannot be grasped by the mind's categories. But what does come into asoga, it's only the chitzonis inyan, the spashtus inyan. Hainu hasichli lavad, v'lo hargoshes ha'atzmi shebenashe benakuda. Not the etzem feeling of elokus, that's the etzem and nakuda of chokhmah. That doesn't come into bina. Only the chitzonis. Dehina yadua u'mavuar v'kama makoimus. It's explained in a number of places in the Nekudas HaAskola, Mei ha'or begiloi. That in the Nekuda of Chokhmah, the or is begiloi, u'kshabah ba'asoga, beribud pratim mis'ala me'or. And when it comes into Asoga, in other words, the analytical process of Bina, with riboy pratim, the more pratim are added, the more you lose the hasan, the more you lose the etzem ha'inyan. You see, it sometimes happens also even with Gemara analysis. Sometimes one is analyzing the halachas and so on and so forth that come out of a sugya in the Gemara. You're analyzing it down to such fine detail that you forget the etzem ha'inyan of what the Gemara is trying to tell you. That is Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or whatever it is. It becomes so like in the nitty gritty that it becomes like very difficult to grasp the itz and the the mind of the Gemara is the meaning of Seichel Eloki. It's hard to grasp that with all the analysis and sub-analysis and sub-sub-analysis and so on and so forth. Again, Kshabah Ba'asoga, Beribui Pratim is Alam or V'yamash Mer B'nekudas HaSkola, Ein Ze HaRibui Do Or HaSeichel. So what's in HaSkola is not the ribui, it's not because it's a ribui or. That's not the Ika Inyan of the Nekudas HaAskola. The Anusha or Seichel, who Oisamahus Shababa Bina. No, that's not the case. It's not the same oil that comes into Bina. Raksha Ben Nekudas HaAskola the Chokhmah. What happens in the Nekuda HaAskola of Chokhmah? In other words, the Etzem of Chokhmah, who be ribui, Ukasher Bala Soga the Bina Mismayet. That's not the case. That's not the pshat. That in our scholar of Chokhmah it's beriboy and bina comes in a state of mute. It's mismayet. It's reduced from level to level. No, that's not the ikar inyan. What's the ikar inyan of the etzem nakuda of Chokhmah? Ki ma shelavad zois hina benakudas haskola meir ha'etzem shalasichli. The etzem nakuda is there, which is not transferred into bina. Bina will never cup that etzem nakuda. It's impossible for it to be manifested in Bina in any way. And when it comes to the process of analytical process and so on, that Nakuda sort of disappears. It's not there anymore. You can't find it. It's disappeared. Why? Because that Etzem Inyan cannot be experienced through the analytical seichel of Bina. It can only be experienced through the bittul of Chokhmah, which is what we're getting to and we'll explain in later prokim. Kitzav adayin tzarich lahavin alon nekudas haskola hitzichli. Isn't it true that seichel that the nekuda of Chokhmah is also a sichli inyan? V'yevshar lo yimar shelo miut b'Chokhmah b'shvil habina, and we can't say that Chokhmah is just mismayit in order to produce Bina. Because Chokhmah is Ayin and Bina is Yesh, it's a different Mahus. Achainyan, the Chokhmah, he Ayin, Bina mi Chokhmah, Yesh mi Ayin, She'ena Musag. In other words, the Ayin itself is not Musag. Mashenk and the Yesh is yes Musag. Because in the Etzem HaSkola, you have this Inyan the etzem inyan asichli, which is the etzem inyan, essentially, as we'll explain later, of elokus hu levadu hu ve'en zulasai. That's what's in the pnimis chochma, and efshar lahavim bo'efen acher. Okay. All right, Bez Hashem, we'll leave it here, and we will continue next week, Bez Hashem.
Okay.
All right. Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Good night, and see you next time around. Bez Hashem.
Thank you. Good
Laila
night.
tov.